Have you ever had a moment that completely caught you off guard, where someone's presence made your heart skip just a little, not in fear, but in curiosity? Today, I'm going to share a story that happened to me one ordinary morning at school, and I promise it's one that will stay with me forever. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, from which cities are you watching us today? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give this video a like if you enjoy these real-life stories. It really helps us bring more of them to you. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the sunlight seems to linger longer on the red and gold leaves scattered across the schoolyard. I had just finished unlocking the main entrance and was adjusting the stack of papers in my arms when I noticed a man lingering near the gate. He wasn't a parent I recognized immediately, and yet there was something about the way he carried himself, his gaze steady, almost searching, that made me instinctively straighten up. "Good morning," I said, smiling politely as he approached. His eyes met mine, and there was a kind of intensity there that made me pause for a second longer than usual. "Good morning," he replied, his voice calm but deliberate. "I'm Daniel, Alex's father. I was hoping I could speak with you for a moment." I nodded, motioning toward a quiet corner of the entrance where the morning chatter of students wouldn't drown out our conversation. As we walked, I noticed the way he carried himself, a mix of fatigue and purpose, as if he had been holding something in for a while and had finally decided it was time to address it. "I've been meaning to understand something about Alex's progress," he began once we had a moment of privacy. "I want to make sure we're doing everything we can to support him, but I'm not sure I fully understand the situation at school." There was a vulnerability in his words, a sincerity that immediately made me soften. I took a deep breath, realizing this wasn't going to be a quick, surface-level conversation. "I completely understand," I said, trying to convey both patience and reassurance. "It's not always easy to see what goes on in the classroom from the outside. I'll do my best to explain and answer any questions you have." We settled on a nearby bench, the morning sun warming our backs, and I began to outline Alex's daily routine, the small victories he had made, and the areas where he still needed guidance. As I spoke, I noticed Daniel leaning in slightly, attentive in a way that felt almost protective. There was a quiet tension, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the tension of two people connecting over something that mattered deeply. At one point, he interrupted me gently. "I just want to make sure he knows we're on the same team. Sometimes I worry he feels alone in this." His voice carried a mix of concern and earnest hope, and I felt an unexpected wave of empathy. It struck me then that this meeting, unexpected as it wasn't just about a child's progress. It was about the bridge between parent and teacher, a shared commitment to understanding and support. By the time our conversation wound down, the initial awkwardness had dissolved. We weren't just two strangers discussing a student. We were collaborators, quietly building trust over simple, heartfelt conversation. As he stood to leave, I noticed a softness in his eyes, a sense of relief that he hadn't brought with him when he first arrived. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I really appreciate your honesty and patience." "Of course," I replied, feeling a gentle warmth linger in the air between us. "We're in this together." As I watched him walk away, back toward his car, I realized how unexpectedly profound a simple encounter could be. One conversation, a few shared words, and suddenly a relationship that had felt distant now seemed grounded, respectful, and quietly meaningful. The days after that first encounter with Daniel felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. Every time I walked through the school entrance, the memory of his steady gaze lingered, like a gentle echo that reminded me of that unexpected morning. Alex, of course, remained blissfully unaware of the shift in our small connection, absorbed in his own world of assignments, friendships, and the occasional mischief. A week later, I saw Daniel again, though this time it wasn't planned. I was helping a group of students line up for recess when I noticed him standing by the fence, glancing toward the playground as if he were searching for something or someone. The sun was higher in the sky that afternoon, casting a warm glow over the schoolyard and turning the scattered leaves into tiny amber flames. "Daniel," I called softly, walking toward him. He turned immediately, a smile breaking across his face that felt less tense than before, more familiar. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said, his voice carrying that same quiet attentiveness that had struck me before. "Not at all," I replied. "Just keeping an eye on these little Energizer bunnies." I gestured toward the students, who were laughing and chasing one another across the playground. He chuckled, a rich, genuine sound that seemed to relax the edges of his worry. We wandered toward a quieter area by the school garden, where the scent of damp soil mixed with the sweetness of late-blooming flowers. There was a rhythm to our conversation this time, less formal, more like two people beginning to understand each other on a deeper level. "I wanted to follow up on our last discussion," he said after a pause, looking down at the gravel under his shoes. I realized there were questions I didn't even know I had about how Alex interacts with the other kids, how he feels about school. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "Sometimes the smallest details can give us the biggest insight," I said. "It's not just about grades. It's about how he feels, how he navigates friendships, how confident he is when he speaks up." For a moment, we just stood there, watching the students, letting the noise of the playground fade into the background. I realized how rare it was to find someone willing to listen with that kind of focus, not just waiting for their turn to speak, but truly hearing. Daniel spoke again, this time quieter, almost reflective. "I think I've been so caught up in trying to guide him that I forgot to really notice him, to understand him from his own perspective." His honesty struck me. It was one thing for a parent to ask questions, another entirely to admit that they were learning as much as their child was. "That awareness is a huge step," I told him. "It means you're present. And that matters more than you think." There was a pause, filled with the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional laughter from the playground. I felt a surprising warmth in my chest, not romantic, but profoundly human, a sense of connection that went beyond titles or roles. Two people, sharing concern and understanding, quietly acknowledging each other's sincerity. Before he left, he turned to me with a small, grateful smile. "I feel better knowing we're on the same page. Thank you for taking the time." "Always," I replied, and I meant it. There was a simplicity in our exchange that made the world feel just a little lighter, a little more manageable. As he walked back to his car, I lingered a moment longer, taking in the garden, the children, the warm afternoon sun. I realized that sometimes the most unexpected connections aren't dramatic. They're quiet, steady, and deeply meaningful, forming in moments that seem ordinary but leave a lasting imprint. And for the first time in a long while, I felt grateful not just for my work, but for the people who make it possible to see its true value. A few weeks passed, and the rhythm of school life carried on as usual. Early mornings, lesson plans, the occasional staff meeting, but there was an underlying thread I couldn't ignore. Every time I saw Daniel waiting at the school entrance or watching Alex during recess, I felt that same quiet tension from before, but now it was accompanied by a sense of familiarity, almost like we had established an unspoken understanding. It was a Thursday afternoon when the moment came that changed the dynamic completely. The school had just finished a short assembly, and students were filtering out into the playground. I noticed Daniel standing near the benches, a little off to the side, watching Alex laugh with his friends. The sunlight hit his hair in a way that made him look almost contemplative, and I felt a tug of curiosity, wondering what had brought him back so early that day. "Daniel," I called gently, approaching him. He turned, and this time his expression carried a hint of nervousness. "I hope you don't mind me stopping you," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I wanted to ask you something more personal today, if that's okay." I nodded, sensing the gravity in his tone. "Of course. What's on your mind?" We moved to the same quiet corner near the garden, the breeze rustling the trees, scattering a few golden leaves across the pathway. He took a deep breath, and I noticed a flicker of hesitation before he spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about how we communicate, about Alex, and how to support him," he began. "But I've also realized that sometimes I'm not very good at asking for help, or admitting when I'm unsure. I was hoping maybe we could talk openly about how we see things, about parenting, teaching, even life in general." There was a vulnerability in his words that made me pause. It wasn't a question. It was an invitation, one that required trust. I felt my own hesitations fade, replaced by a sense of responsibility, not just as his child's teacher, but as someone willing to listen and share. "I'd like that," I said softly. "I think sometimes we all need someone to just talk to exchange perspectives without judgment." We sat together on the bench, letting the noise of the playground fade into the background. Conversation flowed naturally, first about Alex, then about memories of childhood, challenges we'd faced in our own lives, small moments that had shaped us. I found myself laughing at his stories, feeling the warmth of genuine human connection. There was no pretense, no roles, just two people sharing pieces of themselves with mutual respect and care. At one point, he grew quiet, staring at the leaves dancing across the path. "It's strange," he said finally. "I've met a lot of people in my life, but it's rare to find someone you can really talk to, someone who listens and understands without trying to fix everything." I smiled, feeling an unexpected swell of emotion. "I know exactly what you mean, and it's just as rare to find someone willing to listen with that same intention." The air between us seemed to settle, carrying a quiet understanding that went beyond words. For the first time, I realized that our interactions weren't just about guidance for Alex. They were about connection, about seeing another person clearly and being seen in return. When he finally stood to leave, I noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor. There was a lightness in his step, a sense of relief that he hadn't carried in when he first arrived. "Thank you," he said, his voice quieter this time, more reflective. "I didn't realize how much I needed this conversation." "Neither did I replied honestly. "But I'm glad we did." As I watched him walk away, I felt a profound sense of calm, knowing that some of the most meaningful connections come not from grand gestures, but from the courage to show up and truly listen. And in that quiet afternoon, I understood that our bond, unexpected, steady, and deeply human, was something neither of us had anticipated, but both of us would carry forward. The weeks that followed felt like a subtle shift in the air. The school days continued as usual, but there was an underlying sense of calm whenever I saw Daniel. His visits became more relaxed, less about questions and more about sharing little observations, about Alex, about the classroom, even about life outside school. There was a quiet rhythm to our interactions now, a familiarity built on mutual respect and understanding. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped toward the horizon and the playground was nearly empty, Daniel approached the entrance again. This time, he wasn't carrying papers or a list of questions. He simply smiled and nodded in greeting, and I felt that same warmth that had first struck me months ago. "Hello," he said softly. "Do you have a few minutes?" "Of course," I replied, gesturing toward the garden path. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the faint warmth of the fading sun. We walked slowly, side by side, talking in easy conversation about small things, how the school year was progressing, what Alex had been excited about that day, the changes in the season. And yet, beneath the simplicity of our words, there was a deeper connection, a shared understanding that had quietly grown over time. At one point, Daniel stopped, looking out over the empty playground. His expression was thoughtful, almost contemplative. "You know," he said, "I didn't expect any of this when I first came to the school. I thought I'd just ask about homework, grades, things like that. But I ended up learning something much more important." I turned to him, curious. "And what's that?" That connection matters, he said simply. With my son, with the people around me, just seeing and understanding each other, it makes all the difference. And you reminded me of that. I felt a quiet lump in my throat, not from sentimentality, but from the profound clarity of his words. It was true. I had come to realize the same thing. Our unexpected conversations, our shared observations and reflections, had created something meaningful, something steady and enduring. For a long moment we stood together, letting the silence speak for itself. The world felt still, as if it had paused to give us this small space of understanding. I realized then that life often surprises us in the most ordinary places, through the simplest encounters. A teacher, a parent, a bench in the school garden, sometimes that's all it takes to remind us of what really matters. When he finally turned to leave, I smiled, feeling a gentle satisfaction that went beyond professional fulfillment. "Thank you, Daniel," I said, my voice calm and sincere. "For trusting me, for listening, and for sharing." "And thank you," he replied, "for being someone who cares." As I watched him walk away into the fading light, I felt a sense of reflection and quiet growth settle over me. There were no dramatic conclusions, no grand revelations, just the simple, enduring truth that human connection, understanding, and respect could transform an ordinary day into something memorable. I lingered a moment longer, taking in the empty playground, the golden leaves, the quiet hum of the school at dusk. And I realized that sometimes the most meaningful experiences are the ones that appear unexpectedly, quietly shaping us in ways we don't even anticipate. In the end, it wasn't about answers or explanations. It was about being seen, being heard, and meeting someone else with an open heart. And that, I thought, as I locked the entrance for the evening, was a gift far greater than any I could have imagined.